Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. Brothers, sisters, friends, assalamu alaikum. I just want to start with something that kind of reminds me of Guantanamo. When I talk about that, often it's almost like an out-of-body experience because it was that long ago that it doesn't feel that I was really there. It was somebody else and I just was witness to what took place. But something just came to my mind recently. And I remember a soldier, he came over to me once and he said, your buddies, they keep calling me, they say, Himar. They said, Ta'al huna ya himar. Come over here. And he said, what does that mean? Why they call me I said, it's okay. It means it likes you. So what does it mean? I said, it means donkey. I said, if it didn't like you, he'd say, ya khanzir, which means pig, which is like a curse. I said, don't worry about it. So one of the things that I was just recently speaking to Mark, one of the lawyers who will be speaking to you this evening about Abu Zubaydah's case, is the nature of the prisoners. And one thing that I've come across after having visited them around the world, whether it's a tiny little village in Slovakia, or in Sudan, or in France, or in the Gulf states, or Pakistan, or elsewhere, it seems recurrent and concurrent that these prisoners, by and large, are not filled with the rage and hatred that you would expect them to be. And there are reasons for this. And one of the primary reasons, of course, is their faith. There is a beautiful verse in the Quran which says, O you who believe, stand up as just witnesses for Allah, and do not allow your animosity and hatred of the people to cause you to do them an injustice. Be just that it closer to God consciousness. And I believe that most, if not all, are a living embodiment of this. Shakir Amir, I consider him to be my best friend. When I often talk, I consider, people will think he's a very serious guy. But when Shakir Amir speaks, you'll be laughing. He'll make you laugh. He is the type of person that smiles in an embodiment of the prophetic saying, "At-tabassum fi wajhi akhika sadaqa." Smiling in the face of your brother is a charity. And he's always smiling. And if you think about what is it that he has to smile about, the man returned home to a family that didn't know him. Faris, as has been described already, imagine, if there's anybody here who's brought up teenagers, you'll know that's far worse than anything that Guantanamo has to offer. And if you haven't, that's why you're not laughing. But the truth is, imagine coming home to 4 teenagers who essentially either don't know you, have never seen you before, or you were too young to ever remember you. And then to intrude, because that's really what it is, into their lives and tell them that you're a father. I remember speaking with some of the Guantanamo prisoners that were referred to here, that Corey is talking about. They were informed of the death of their child. One of them was during the Syrian revolution as they were trying to leave Syria, and he couldn't get reunited with his family. And it was heartbreaking to see what Guantanamo had done to him, and to know that he'd never see his child again. But his response was what? He said, Alhamdulillah. When I said to him, I'm phoning to give you ta'ziyah, your condolences, he said, it's okay. Alhamdulillah, my son, I believe he's gone to Allah and he's a martyr. He didn't cry, wasn't upset, he didn't show it to me anyway, he smiled. And it reminded me of Sheikh Talal al-Zahrani. Sheikh Talal al-Zahrani was the chief of police in Medina for 30 years. His son was captured at the infamous Qila' Jangi, where many prisoners were massacred and drowned and burned and bombed. And after surviving from that, he ends up in 2005, quote unquote, committing suicide, which nobody really believes. But even then, Talal al-Zahrani, when I phoned him first, I remember I said again that I'm phoning to give you condolences. He said, what's wrong with you? That was his response. What do you mean condolences? He said, I'm happy. My son is a martyr. My son, inshallah, is in paradise. He didn't commit any wrong. Wrong was done to him. He was held without charge or trial. He was tortured and abused. So I have no regrets about his end. I only want to hold his abusers to account. And that's the part that we've been trying to do. That over the years, one of the points that's so important to remember about Guantanamo is that some people would have loved for us to remain silent. There are prisoners who've been returned to their countries of domicile and have been forced to remain silent as part of the condition for their return. Much of those countries exist within a place we hold to be the most sacred land of Islam. And if that had been the collective response of all the prisoners around the world, what would they have said about Guantanamo? It's not such a bad place, is it? Nobody's complaining about it. Nobody said anything about it. Therefore, it can't be that bad. And so it was necessary for us to lay our lives open like a book for the rest of the world to peer into and to scrutinize again and again and again. It wasn't enough that the CIA and the FBI and the MI5 and military intelligence and every other alphabet agency you can think of tore into our lives and interrogated us and beat us and tortured us and made us watch other people being beaten to death. That wasn't enough. When we returned home, we came home to face a lot more, to be scrutinized in ways no human being in recent times ever has been. And despite all of that and interrogation, there were no charges against us. In fact, what the world knows today is that we didn't commit the crimes. The governments that were involved in our incarceration committed mass crimes crimes of torture, false imprisonment, cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, and then on the back of that torture, invading countries and destabilizing entire regions and nations and creating organizations that make Al-Qaeda look relatively tame as a result of those invasions. That's what they did, and they continue to get away because, as Corey mentioned, have you ever heard of any of the torturers involved in the torture program ever being charged for a crime? No, and they won't be, not here in the UK and not abroad. I want to tell you just this story of an individual that I went to go and see. As I mentioned, I went to go and visit many former prisoners who'd been released or resettled to countries around the world. And this particular prisoner just tells you of some of the almost unbelievable state that some of the prisoners had been put in. An Egyptian prisoner called Adil al-Jazzar, who was resettled to Slovakia in the small town of Zvolen up in the north towards the border of Poland. I went and was given gifts by some of the brothers over here to take for him, including a bicycle that folds. When I arrived in Bratislava, he came to meet me, and I was carrying all these bags and this bicycle and stuff, and I thought he's going to help me a little bit, but he didn't. And as we walked up the stairs and walked around and got onto the train and then got to his flat and we had to walk all the way upstairs, he didn't help me at all. And I was getting a little bit upset with him. Why are you not helping me? And then, as we went into his front room, it was prayer time. So as you know, when you pray as a Muslim, we stood together. And it's at this point I understood why he never carried those bags. When my foot touched his foot, I realized that's no ordinary foot. It was made of plastic, hard plastic. It was prosthetic. And when we finished the prayer, he took his leg off. And then I did an interview with him, which you can see in these books on the back. And in it, he explained how his leg was amputated in Guantanamo. There are several people, in fact, who had lost limbs amputated by the Americans, whether in Kandahar or Bagram or Guantanamo. In fact, it's hard to remember exactly how many of them there are. And Adil was resettled in this place where he didn't know the language, where he didn't know any person. There were no mosques. In fact, there was no dark-skinned person in that place at all. You stood out like a sore thumb. And he began to reconnect with his family through Skype, and they would see him for the first time. Eventually, after the Arab Spring, he was returned home. So that is a success story. Shakir Amr coming home after 14 years is a success story. Faiz al-Kandari, who you've seen returning after 15 years to Kuwait, is a success story. And soon you'll be seeing Omar Khadr, who I first saw as a young Canadian teenager brought to the Bagram detention facility with his eye shot out, with huge exit wounds from his shoulder and from his chest, looking like a living dead zombie, a young child, who when you would see him and hear him recite the Quran, you would think, this kid, how is it possible he complains about nothing? How is it possible? And that his entire age of the formative years, just like Muhammad al-Gharani, were formed in Guantanamo. But then look at what happens. Look at what it produces as the man. And inshallah, you'll be seeing soon exactly what kind of man he is to this day. So I'm going to really end there, but just to make sure that it's after, as Asim said, 17 years doing this every year in one way or the other, and seeing that many faces here that I know, many new faces, that Guantanamo still has 40 prisoners there. That's 40 too many. One thing that I've learned is that there are 4 US administrations, 4 US presidential terms that have spanned the period of Guantanamo and then some more, whether Republican or Democrat. One thing that's clear to me, whether they've ordered the closure of Guantanamo or ordered to be open or ordered to remain open, Guantanamo is as American as apple pie. And until America recognizes that, we have a job to do to make sure that not only are they told, but also that those countries that made Guantanamo possible, those that were complicit from the Libyans to the British and everything in between, that America didn't do this on its own. So everybody is complicit as far as states are concerned. It is important that we point that out. Thank you.